calls in here. Let me get some more calls. Let's get Rami. Let's get Rami in here.
This is a debate between Tariq Nasheed and a Moroccan guy named Rami over the real appearance of the Moors.
There you go. So what's the issue you have, sir?
Why do you always claim more civilization when it has nothing to do with you or FBA? Explain that.
So, for those of you that don't know, FBA means Foundational Black American, and it can be used as a relation term to separate Black Americans from other Africans, but it seems that it is not being used here in that way. Also, yes, Moors do have something to do with Black people in general, so it does extend.
Me.
More civilization?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it does because all Black people were called Moor.
What he is saying here, Tariq Nasheed, is absolutely true because different people from different parts of the world who were Black were also called Moor by especially the Portuguese, the Ceylon Moors, the Swahili Moors, the Moors of North Africa, the West African Moors. There's tons of people in West Africa. We'll talk about that later. And also in India, they said there were Moors.
Moors were Arabs, man. They're not black.
No, that's not true.
So the first thing that lets me know that this guy doesn't know what he's talking about is the fact that he puts Moors and Arabs on the same level. Even the people who argue that Moors were North African pale skinned people will never say that they were Arab because the word Arab was used for Arabs, never Moor. This is because the word Moor is, well, firstly, it was used by Arabs as well to describe the people living in that area. And so to think that they would also call themselves a word that they use as well. And then, of course, you have words that the other Arabs use, like Afrik meaning Africans, which this word, when they used it, they included every other type of person in Africa except the ones that they consider foreigners, like the Italians, Turks, and Arabs.
You really gonna educate me about my own culture and my own history, Tariq? You serious?
By the way, I get tired of this argument because I've seen people born in a country who live in a country, and then when you start talking about their history, they're wholly unaware of it. Like I said, some people that from America, they have no idea that there's the Miami tribe. They have no idea that there's, the confederations that existed with the Native Americans. They have no idea about the Dutch genocide of the Iroquois. They have no idea about all of these things that happened and how the Iroquois had to sell part of New York for, a nonsense amount of money, and then they had to move to Canada. But then it's like, oh, I know more about the history because I live there. It's like, that's not how things work.
Yeah, I am.
Hey, to break it up to you, Tariq, Moors are Arabs.
Moors were definitely not Arab. By the way, if they were Arab, why then, when people got to Arabia, did they use words like Arabia, Arabia Felix, Arabs? Why didn't they just go, oh, we're talking about Saudi Mauritania? Why Saudi Arabia and not Saudi Mauritania? Why Arabia Felix and not more Felix? Which, by the way, also is kind of showing an ignorance because a lot of people who actually migrated to North Africa, though they identify as Arab today, a lot of them are actually Turkish in heritage, and some of them are even further. They're like Afghans and all these other types of people who wouldn't technically qualify as Arabs because Arab is a very specific place in the Middle East. For example, Pakistani people are not Arab.
Berbers and Arabs.
There were
And I find it kind of frustrating that every time you debate a white supremacist,
okay,
He said Berbers and Arabs, and the word Berber just means barbarian, so it doesn't exactly explain anything. And the word Arab obviously describes something. Berbers existed in all parts of Africa. I've shown you Al Masudi describing multiple parts of Africa with that same term, Berber. They've described parts of East Africa as Berber or Barbara, and they've described again multiple parts. So saying Berber means anything. Berber doesn't mean anything racially, and also there are Berbers even today who are black.
you said that Moors were Arabs and Berbers. I said no, based on history, that's not true. All of them were not Arabs and Berbers.
That's an interesting clarification. The fact that he says all of them were not Arabs and Berbers, meaning that he probably believes some of them were. And I can see where he's coming from that angle. And we're going to talk about it later, I hope.
Many of them they were Islamic, but that doesn't mean they were Arabs.
Okay, so he does further clarify that many of them were necessarily Muslim. So that's probably what he means by more in this sense. But again, Moorish people, most of them were of black origin or black African origin, which is why the term was used. And then again was adopted for many different types of people because of, I mean, just how language works.
Because they would have just called them Arabs. They called them Moors for a reason. Why do you think they called them Moors?
Now, this is where the debate should get interesting because once you understand where the word Moor comes from, the debate gets a little deeper. And once you understand that it's a term of people's color, and I've shown Roman scholars writing about where the origin of this word is, which was based on their burnt faces. That's the oldest that I can find.
you need to do your own history, Tariq.
I know.
Moors are
Well,
Arabs and Berbers, my friend. And
I,
I
I
know. Go ahead.
A circle that needs to be squared are the hundreds of history books that exist from the Arab land that show that there was early movement of Arabs inside of North Africa. And these early Arabs assisted the native population in taking over places like Spain and bringing Islam to Spain and Portugal and other parts of Europe. I mean, even England had a bit of touch from the Islamic world. And we know where Islam came from. This is one of the problems with people who just assert things without saying things. I'm almost certain that with the information I have, I could debate someone who actually believes that the Moors are black, even though I believe it too. I could debate them and win simply because I have a vast piece of information, which it takes more scholarship to debunk or go against it. A lot of people, when they talk, you will notice that they don't have enough information, and then they're going to have to repeat themselves over and over again and just go, oh, no, no, I believe there were this, I believe there were that.
I know if you know. I know why they called him that. Why do you think they called him that?
Because it was part of the Arab civilization.
Isn't it funny that he said he should do his research and he doesn't even know why the word more exists? He doesn't even know what the word Moor means because they're part of the Arab civilization. First, the word Moor existed prior to Arabs ever existing in that region. So I don't understand where he's coming from with that.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it was. Come
Then
on.
why didn't they call them Arabs?
Because they are Arabs.
What a terrible answer. Why didn't they call them Arabs? Because they were Arabs. That doesn't make sense. If they were Arabs, why didn't they call them Arabs? Now, again, I could sit here and show you document after document where some people who took over the Iberian Peninsula were called Arabs, but we'll talk about that another day.
Why
The reason
didn't
why
they?
they were called Moors was because of the fact that they were Muslims, and they associate every Muslim as being Arab. However,
Here's the problem. So, over here you can tell that he's heard something, but he's not fully aware of what he's saying. So he says the reason why they call them Moors is because they associated that with Muslims. So it is true that in later years, the word Moor would mean Islamic in a general sense, but it did not mean that in the early days. And the word Moor had nothing to do with Islam. The word Moor existed prior to Islam. And in fact, when Islam came, some of the people who were called Moor were the ones that were detached from Islam, the ones who are still practicing the older religions in the region. It makes sense to me that he doesn't know this, by the way, because there's a lot of shift in North Africa towards the Arab culture.
Where the majority of the leaders are Arabs. You can
That
look it
doesn't.
up.
Why did they call them Moors?
The majority of the leaders were definitely not Arab. That is absolutely not true. Even if you go with the entire takeover of North Africa by Arabs, what they did was they occupied or they solidified themselves by integrating their culture with the native population. So they did not just replace them in the beginning. Later years, they just came more and more and more and more and more. But in the early years, they did not do that. So most of the leaders we do know, we have their names, were definitely not Arabs, most of them.
Because it was part of the Moorish civilization. They
Moor was a
originated in Morocco, dude.
So place names might seem like they've always been the same for a long time. There's a reason why I didn't call Yemen Yemen. I called it Arabia Felix. And that's because names in the past change. Morocco was actually Marrakesh, which has nothing to do with Moor as a word. And only later, when they wanted it to sound closer to the word Moor, they changed it to Morocco. So Morocco has is not where Moors start. Moors actually, I mean, depending on what year you're talking about, but from the Europeans, Moor is Mauritania, Tingatino, Mauritania, the other one, and then afterwards it's the other Mauritania. So the word Moor is related to Mauritania, not Morocco. Morocco was the domain of Idris bin Idris.
Because
or
every time when the Arab dynasty ruled Morocco, they called them Moors.
So here's the contradiction in what he's saying. He said the word Moor means Arab. Now he's saying when the Arab dynasty ruled Morocco, they called them Moors. Well, why would Arabs call other Arabs Moors if the word Moor means Arab? That's like the Arabs going somewhere else and saying these are the Arabs. It doesn't make any sense. The reason why they called them Moors is because they wanted to separate themselves from the people actually living in that area.
why did they call them that? Moor is a descriptive term.
Well, regardless of why
They're going to stick to the same thing over and over again. So he should just give them the answer for why they were called the Moors so that they can move on.
they call them that or not, I don't know exact reason, but the Moors
I
were part of the
So he doesn't know the exact reason. That's kind of disappointing, especially for someone who said you must do the history.
Arab civilization. You can look at
I
the architecture of Morocco; they're all Arabs, my friend.
I do.
This is another pointless point. You can't say you should look at all of the architecture and that will prove that they all are Arabs, because in East Africa they also had um, Arab architecture, but they're not Arabs. In the Swahili coast, they had Arab architecture, but they were not Arabs. In India, there's Arab architecture, but doesn't mean they're Arabs. I mean, that's like saying, and I don't believe that this is all European architecture, but that's like saying the types of buildings that you find today that are European based proves that everyone, everywhere you go that has that type of building, Singapore, Japan, Africa, they're all white people from Europe. Architecture has nothing to do with race.
I do. I know what they called them Moors. Moor
Not
was a
because they're black, dude. It's not because that they're black.
So he's already lost the debate because the word Moor literally means burnt skin or black or dark skin, depending on how far back you go. If you go back to the Romans, it does mean uh dark skin, like extremely dark skin.
It is. That's literally what the word for black was at the time because they weren't really speaking English. They were kind of speaking Latin.
Although I agree with what he's saying here, the word Moor was not the only word they had for black. They had negri. They had they had 100 words to describe black people.
The Latin word, it was like Maurice, that's like black or dark. Even now, if you look up the word Moor, different variations of it means black or dark right now, right?
This is why he doesn't know this term, because the person who taught them that Moors were not black could not have taught him the name. Because if he did, then the question would be, well, why are we called Moor if we're not black? Because as you can imagine, a lot of North Africans are very pale in skin.
Right?
Dark doesn't necessarily mean that they come from West Africa because basically, when you associate black, you associate West African.
So any of you who doesn't know what just happened, he probably Googled the word and then he noticed that the word does mean black, but now he's sort of reverting. At first, he said the word black does not mean, the word Moor does not mean black, but now he's accepting it, but reluctantly. He's sitting there, he's accepting it, but like, oh, black doesn't mean West African. At no point did he say that all black people West African. And that's another thing. A lot of times, well, I've said it before. Remember that guy that I used to react to as well? The one thing that they do in order to try and reduce Africans to a smaller and smaller bit is they say that West African is the only type of African that is African. So Central African is not African, East African is not African, South African is not African, except the Bantus, which they will say are from West Africa. So therefore, that is, and so the only place where there's black people is West Africa. That's what they will claim, and this is part of that giant push. And the reason why he's saying that is because he's trying to escape from the fact that the term Moor means black without fail.
And we are not West African. We are North Africans. We're completely different than West Africans.
Again, this is a straw man. He never said that they were West African. He said that the word meant black. And of course, North Africans are West Africans. They're Northwest Africans. Then you have Northeast Africans like the Egyptians, just like you have the Central West Africans, which are the Equatorial Africans. And then you have the Southwest Africans, which are the Bantu people, the Khoisan, the Pygmies, all of those.
Here's the thing. In Germany, while I'm talking, can you start looking up something while we talk?
Evidence? Who wants to look at that?
Let's do an education thing here. I want you to pull up Google while we're talking. Look up Saint Benedict the Moor.
Dude, who cares what these Europeans have to say? The fact is,
And there it is. Who cares? So this is Saint Benedict the Moor, a black African. The reason why he doesn't want to pull it up is because it's going to show that black people were called Moor, and he does not want that to be part of the conversation.
the more
No,
civil.
no, it don't work like that. No, now it's who cares? Yeah, this is what we're talking about. When the
Where does he think the word Moor comes from? Does he actually think the word Moor does not come from the fact that Europeans made it up?
Moors went to Europe, they called them Moors because of the way they look. Now it's who cares what the Europeans think? No, it don't work like that, sir.
I will watch the rest of this video on part 2, so you can wait for that.